Hi everybody, welcome to week 7. This week we're going to talk about Dada and Expressionism in Germany after World War I. This week marks a really big shift in the course on modern art because for the first time we have an element that, as the slide lecture says, is what we might call anti-aesthetic. In other words, artists are beginning to push against the very notion of aesthetics and beauty in art and really question the ultimate nature of art. So when we look at an artist like an art movement like Dada or an artist like Marcel Duchamp, we're actually looking at artists who are really challenging the very notion of art, or what we might say are the philosophical problems of art. So don't be surprised if you feel that this work is difficult this week. You might really be turned off by it. I know I certainly was as an art student. However, I came to really appreciate this work more on the conceptual grounds of what it stood for in terms of ideas, as opposed to really thinking about it in terms of the kinds of things we've been talking about so far with regard to the formal properties of art. So I think it's really important to think about why modern art produces its own criticism, its own critique in the movement of Dada. And I think we know that part of that has to do with the historical moment, the social conditions of Europe after the most devastating war that it's known. So these artists are really pushing against what we might call the status quo, and starting to associate all art with that status quo. Anyway, we have a two-part slide lecture this week, as well as 2 other videos. So we have this lecture on Dada. We have this lecture on German Expressionism after World War I, and I think you'll especially appreciate that because some of the artists that you worked on last week with your posts, where you researched on the Museum of Modern Art website, are mentioned in this lecture. And you'll get a sense of, say, the way that German Expressionism became less ideal and less about sort of finding form to express inner emotion, maybe more positive emotions, and how that shifted toward art that really depicted the horror of war and the kind of emotions that people associated with that particular historical period. Then there's this short video on Marcel Duchamp, which is a discussion he had in 1965. And keep in mind, this guy, he's kind of known as like the trickster of the art world. And you might really sit down and listen to this and say, I'm trying to figure out why this guy is an artist. Think of him as the anti-artist. That might be a good way to approach this. He says some interesting things in there, and which I'll pick up on in a minute. And then please be sure to watch this video from Smart History on degenerate art, which really picks up on something that was said in the slide lecture around Adolf Hitler's desire to ban avant-garde art in Germany. So a lot of all of the art that we're discussing in the course was in Germany's mind decadent, and he wants to purify German culture of what he considers to be this dangerous and degenerate art, because he believes that it affects people and makes them degenerate. Well, we know about his views on that with regard to human beings. So you can see that his attitude toward art is similar to the way he wanted to purify German culture of individuals that he thought were undesirable, which is a pretty chilling thing. So take a look at this excerpt from Hitler's speech on degenerate art. You'll see very clear references to the work that we're looking at in the class. And there will be a quiz this week, as well as a discussion board. So the idea with the discussion board is to share with the class your a description and analysis of the artwork that you've chosen for your museum visit. I'm making the readings optional this week, so there is a chapter in Gomperst on Dada. However, I'm going to say that I'd rather you focus on getting to the museum if you have not done it yet, and really focusing on setting out laying out this 3 to 5 paragraph post this week in the discussion board. Because if you do this and you really take this seriously, you have set the stage for your final paper for the course. So the more time you put in now, and the more willing you are to really go through a complex analysis, I think the better you'll be down the road. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for the same things that I have been looking for, which is a really good description of the artwork. Imagine you're describing it to somebody who can't see it. Tell us about what it does visually. What are the elements of the artwork? And from there, talk about the way that it connects to a particular art movement. We need to know what the characteristics of that art movement are. And then we need to see why this is justified as an artwork that embodies those characteristics. So make sure you make those connections. Tell us a little bit about the artist. Does their biography tell us something? Take Kirchner, for example, right? When somebody is damaged in war, it's going to impact the kind of artworks that they make later. So that helps us understand the motivation behind the work. In the case of some artists, this might not be a factor. In some, it may. So think about if biographical information is helpful. Also think about the social issues of the historical period. Was this artwork a response to a political problem, a social issue, war, hunger, something else? Was it a celebration of life? Was it a positive view of life in response to negative aspects of society, right? Sometimes artists react against by describing something in a beautiful way. Help us know a little bit more about that. And if you're inclined, tell us a little bit about your visit. What museum did you go to? Definitely say what museum you went to and the artwork. But tell us a little bit what it was like viewing an artwork in person. Was it different than slides? How was the work displayed? What did this label, the wall label, say? Was the information on the wall label helpful to you? You're not obligated to answer these questions, but if they help you kind of break into the writing for the week, I'd be curious to know how you feel. Be sure to attach an image of the artwork in your discussion and tell us where you saw the piece. Please remember to do your post by Thursday night and include 2 comments by Sunday. These comments are important. Some of you are really looking carefully at other people's posts and pulling out something that helps that person who made the original post think more deeply about their work, about their writing, right? In other words, when you post a comment, you should be saying, my job is to push this person to think more deeply about what they said. And the person who made the original post should say, I didn't think about it that way. That's really helpful to me. I'm seeing what I said in a more complex way. So sometimes it takes the objectivity of another person looking at somebody else's writing, looking at the ideas that somebody else is writing about, and helping them pull out even more ideas. All right, so what I want to do now is just look at a couple of things quickly. So to kind of put German Expressionism into context, right? So here we have this Kirchner, Self-Portrait as a Soldier, 1915. And, I want to sort of use it as representative of an artwork that Hitler and the Nazis would have found very offensive, right? So here we have this raw, right? This man with his hand is cut off, right? This was not the case. Kirchner was psychologically injured in war, did not experience terrible physical injury in war, but the painting is representative. It's symbolic of the kind of psychological injury that he suffered. Well, if we look at this in relation to, say, this piece, which comes up in the Smart History video, we can see that this is the kind of work that Hitler approved of. This was the kind of purity, the pure art that he wanted to see German people inspired by. But really, what do we know? We know from the very first week of the class that this artwork is reflective of art problems and concerns, right? The kinds of formal elements of line, of value, of color, of representing form in a realistic way that goes all the way back to the Renaissance. So what Hitler really wanted to do is bring art backward. He was very offended by these avant-garde moves to push art in new directions, and he found them insulting. And as he says, degenerate. So if you look at this one next to this one, boy, you really see that he's so against the kinds of distortions of the form, the arbitrary use of color, the fact that it doesn't celebrate human experience, it critiques it, right? And this is very offensive. So I wanted to put that into context, and then also just to talk a little bit about Dada, because Dada is so complicated and can really frustrate, I think, a student who's just starting to get a hang of the trajectory of modern art around the impulses of Impressionism, of Post-Impressionism, of Expressionism and Cubism, and then suddenly somebody like Marcel Duchamp comes along and puts this bottle rack that he basically sees in a restaurant, right, where they're drying bottles in a restaurant, and says, I'm making that an artwork. So something like that, or his piece, The Fountain, which is basically a toilet turned on its side, signed by, with an imaginary name, Armut, right? He is trying to kind of poke art in the eye with these works. And what's so interesting, as he says in that very short video, he says, everything will become beautiful in time. People are going to see something in my work. It might take 40 years, but ultimately human beings are programmed to find beauty in things. I want to pose a challenge to you as you look at something like this fountain or the bottle rack. I want to challenge you to think about the fact that while Duchamp pushes art to its limits by saying by really, in a way, scoffing it entirely, right? By sort of rejecting it. In some ways, he's potentially keeping the very notion of what art is alive. So in an act that seems rebellious and nihilistic even, perhaps he kept questions going about art that we really value today. And I want to point out to you something here. So here, if we have the fountain, I want to show you a recent artwork done by an Italian artist, Maurizio Catalan, who did this piece called America, which is in the Guggenheim Museum in New York. It is a direct nod and a wink to Duchamp's urinal piece. Now, at first glance, maybe we might, look at this and feel insulted that somebody's calling a toilet an artwork. It is made out of solid gold. It's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars just in gold. I think actually millions, if I remember correctly. And this sat in the Guggenheim Museum in a bathroom for over a year, and was used by patrons as they went to the bathroom. So the odd juxtaposition of a solid gold toilet used as a toilet was really a provocative gesture in the art world. But this gesture goes directly back to Dada. So when you're thinking about what Dada is, it's use of chance, right? Of ripping up paper and throwing it on the ground and saying, yep, I like that. Doesn't that just poke a stick right in the eye of artists who are working so hard to find balance and harmony in their compositions, etc.? Anyway, there's more to the story about this toilet. I suggest you look it up online because it's been in the news very recently with regard to politics in the United States. All right, everybody, have a great week, and I will talk with you soon. Bye-bye.